The conflict in Rafah, a humanitarian crisis. The world watched in horror as the conflict in Rafah escalated. The intensity of the fighting, the heart-wrenching images of destruction, and the sheer scale of human suffering shocked the global conscience. Rafah, once a bustling city, lay in ruins, a grim testament to the devastating consequences of the ongoing conflict. Hospitals overflowed with the injured, their resources stretched thin in the face of overwhelming need. Families huddled in makeshift shelters, their lives upended, their futures uncertain. The plight of the civilians trapped in Rafah became a symbol of the human cost of this intractable conflict. The international community grappled with the unfolding humanitarian crisis, struggling to provide aid and support to those caught in the crossfire. Calls for a ceasefire grew louder with each passing day as the death toll continued to mount. Humanitarian organizations warned of a looming catastrophe, with dwindling supplies and limited access to the besieged city. The situation in Rafah served as a stark reminder of the urgent need for a peaceful resolution to the conflict, one that would alleviate the suffering of innocent civilians and pave the way for a more stable future. The Biden administration's tightrope walk. The Biden administration found itself walking a diplomatic tightrope as it navigated the complex realities of the conflict. On one hand, the United States has long been a staunch ally of Israel, providing unwavering military and diplomatic support. On the other hand, the administration faced mounting pressure to address the escalating humanitarian crisis in Rafah and hold all parties accountable for their actions. The situation presented a significant foreign policy challenge for President Biden, forcing him to balance competing interests and navigate a minefield of domestic and international pressures. The administration's response was measured, emphasizing the need for de-escalation and a return to dialogue. President Biden engaged in a flurry of phone calls with regional leaders, urging restraint and a commitment to finding a peaceful resolution. The U.S. also worked through diplomatic channels, including the United Nations, to secure humanitarian access to Rafah and provide aid to those in need. However, the administration's efforts were met with limited success, as the violence continued unabated. America's red line, a line in the sand. Central to the Biden administration's stance was the concept of a red line, a point of no return that, if crossed, would trigger a more assertive American response. The nature of this red line remained deliberately ambiguous, allowing the administration to maintain a degree of flexibility in its dealings with both Israel and the international community. This ambiguity, however, also fueled uncertainty and speculation, leaving observers to decipher the administration's true intentions. Some analysts argued that the red line represented a clear warning to Israel, signaling that continued military action in Rafah would have consequences for the U.S.-Israel relationship. Others viewed it as a rhetorical device, a way for the administration to appear tough without committing to any specific course of action. The ambiguity surrounding the red line highlighted the delicate balancing act facing the Biden administration as it sought to uphold its commitment to Israel's security while also addressing the concerns of the international community and upholding its own values. The Biden administration faced a chorus of condemnation from the international community for its perceived inaction in the face of the Rafah crisis. European allies, long accustomed to a more even-handed U.S. approach to the conflict, expressed their dismay at the administration's unwavering support for Israel. The United Nations, hamstrung by internal divisions, struggled to forge a unified response, further highlighting the limitations of international institutions in addressing complex crises. Domestically, the Biden administration faced mounting pressure from within its own party to take a more forceful stance against Israel. Progressive Democrats, vocal in their criticism of Israel's actions, called on the administration to leverage U.S. military aid as a means of influencing Israeli policy. The administration's response, however, remained cautious, wary of alienating key constituencies and further inflaming an already volatile situation. The crisis in Rafah cast a long shadow over the future of U.S.-Israel relations, exposing underlying tensions and raising questions about the sustainability of the long-standing alliance. The Biden administration's unwavering support for Israel, despite growing international and domestic pressure, signaled a continuation of the close relationship that has characterized U.S. policy for decades. However, the cracks were beginning to show. The growing rift between the Democratic Party's base and Israel's policies posed a particular challenge for the Biden administration. The party's progressive wing, increasingly vocal in its criticism of Israel, demanded a fundamental reassessment of U.S. policy, one that prioritized human rights and international law. The administration, however, remained committed to the special relationship, arguing that Israel's security was paramount to U.S. interests in the region. The crisis in Rafah had far-reaching implications for global stability and U.S. leadership. The conflict, already one of the most intractable in the world, threatened to destabilize an already volatile region, with the potential to draw in regional powers and further complicate efforts to combat terrorism and extremism. The Biden administration's handling of the crisis would have lasting consequences for America's standing in the world, particularly in the Middle East. America's perceived bias towards Israel, coupled with its reluctance to hold its ally accountable for its actions, risked undermining U.S. credibility as an honest broker in the conflict. This perception, if left unchecked, could fuel anti-American sentiment, complicate diplomatic efforts, and hinder the United States' ability to advance its interests in the region and beyond. The crisis in Rafah served as a stark reminder of the complex challenges facing the United States in an increasingly multipolar world.